Season 5, Episode 5 of Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Stealers. I am Sam Fetterman. That is Jonathan Litzkin, and Kevin Sweeney from Sports Illustrated is here with us. And tomorrow is a big day in college basketball. Kevin, you've been writing all about it. You've been covering the draft process. Can you kind of go into what this draft process has felt compared to some other draft processes?
Yeah, I think, obviously at the top, the lack of excitement is pretty palpable. Certainly not the first person to bring it up, but I don't think there's a whole lot of like desire to be picking at the top of this NBA draft. Obviously, you'd rather have your pick than not. So if you're the Hawks, like you're not sitting there like, God damn, we got the number one pick. But I do think there's kind of an understanding that like guys are going to get picked higher in this draft than they would in other drafts, just because it doesn't have the star power at the top. But so I think that has been a huge deal. I think kind of more centric to the college discussion. I think probably the biggest story has been the NIL situation. Not that it hasn't been a factor in previous years, but quite honestly, I think last year was probably the first year where you felt like, all right, now NIL can make the playing field even, right? Like we can pay a kid $500,000 and he was going to get a 2A, which is going to pay him $500,000. And so we can make it even, and then he can make a basketball decision. He wants to come back to school. He wants to have fun with his friends. He wants to play, in great atmospheres instead of in the G League. Like, boom, we can do it. No, I think the thing that's different this year and really probably only became different here in the last month is that now it's a bad financial decision to go to the NBA for a lot of people, which is like a crazy thing to talk about. Like the fact that we're here, I mean, there's plenty of like crazy financial things you could go into here, but I think Coleman Hawkins probably is the best example of this. Like I truly do believe when Coleman Hawkins said, "I'm focused on the draft. I want to be in the draft," and like I'm leaving the door open, he meant that. Like it was not I'm doing this to behoove Illinois fans who I'm betraying or whatever the case. Like I truly think he thought that if the difference was going to be I could make 600,000 or 700,000 in college and 500,000 in the NBA, I might as well go make the 500,000 in the NBA. And now, certainly post Asabor, but even before, it's now I could go get $1 million. I could go get $1.5 million. I might be able to push towards 2. And if you can get that kind of money instead of a 2-way, it's pretty hard to turn down. And so I think that has really permeated the last kind of week or so of discussions, is guys realizing that like I kind of have to go back to college if I want to make the best financial move. And amazingly, that's created some leverage schools could use against some leverage schools or players could use against NBA teams. Like, hey, like, John L. Davis, probably the most prominent example of this. Like, hi, like, look, guys, like, I'm not taking a 2-way. So I need a promise before May 29th that I'm getting drafted and I'm getting a guarantee. And then we could talk. But like, we don't need like, it allowed him to really narrow down his process. So, yeah, I think that's been a huge deal. I do think that it will be a story of tomorrow as a lot of the biggest name decisions come in. Not that everyone will stay in the draft, but I do think that, more, certainly over 50% of the big names I predict will be back in school next year. And a big reason why is the financial implications.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at the articles that you wrote and then just also thinking about what I've heard on Twitter and in other places about these guys and where I think they fit in the NBA versus the college game. And I'm thinking we're probably going to end up with most of these guys coming back. Like, I think that there's a legit possibility. Like DeRon Holmes is gone. Mobo, once Carlton Lingard committed to San Francisco, the writing was on the wall there. PJ Hall is gone. But like, I'm a little bit surprised that we've kind of gotten this far and we're still at a 50-50 with Alex Caravan. I thought when he entered the draft that, he was going to be a first-round pick. But apparently a lot of people don't think as highly of him as I do. And he could be back at UConn. That's been rumored as a pure 50-50. And I think if you look at the players currently in the transfer portal, and I've even heard like Johnny Furphy might not be like 100% in the drafts, and that really surprised me. I thought he would definitely end up in the draft. If there's a surprising decision tomorrow, what would you think that would be?
That's a good question. I think Furphy going back to school would certainly be a big surprise. I think, Harrison Ingram is another guy that, like, I don't think has technically closed the door. Trey Alexander, another guy, technically hasn't closed the door. Neither guy was great at the combine, right? Like, if there's like that, those would be like shockwave type moves.
I think Trey Alexander did close the door.
He said he closed the door, but his agency, through his agency, he did not close the door. So technically, the door is never actually closed unless you.
Yeah, I want to say that like Creighton fans on Twitter were like trying to find these like loopholes in like the text that like it was funny.
Right. I mean, look, it's hard because every single kid says they're all in. Like it's funny. Like I go to the combine every year. It's in Chicago. It's super convenient and like it's awesome because you get so much access. You can talk to every kid and like, hey, Mark Sears, what do you think? Hey, Cam Christie, what do you think? Like, but every single one of them is always going to say at that moment, like, I'm all in on the draft because in their heads they are. Like Mark Sears truly probably believed on, May 15th when I talked to him that he was going to be able to get drafted and leave Alabama. And like now, the thing Mark Sears, who's 5'10" and a quarter without shoes and like probably isn't getting more than a 2A, is going to look up and say, probably need to go back to Alabama, right? So like.
I was go on. I was going to ask who you think the pre-combine. Who are kind of the kids that you thought like, yeah, they'll probably end up going back to school that like may now be leading towards the draft, or maybe it's 50-50.
I thought JT Toppin was the big one, and so for him to go to Texas Tech was a big deal. I actually thought that coming in it felt like a lock he would be in college, and then he played well, and I was like, okay, all of a sudden. Things maybe just got interesting. I thought the same thing with Bayan Dongo, who was obviously at the G League camp. Like I thought that he was another guy that like you felt like he didn't need to do a ton to help his stock to want to stay in. Like he was someone that it seemed like was more pro if he could be. And the fact that he decided to come back was a big deal. I don't think anyone really swung it too heavily, from going back to staying in. Like I thought. Some of these guys had nice moments. Like, Caravan had a good day too, but a bad day one. You didn't really like build that momentum to say, okay, he's clearly there. I mean, like the guys who I thought were really great in the combine scrimmages were guys who were already all in. KJ Simpson, Baylor Shireman, et cetera. So like I think almost all the quote unquote 50-50 decisions, I'd be surprised if they're not in college basketball next year. Like I'd be surprised if Sears, Caravan, and Caleb Love, who I think are probably the big three at the moment. I would be surprised if any of them wound up staying in the draft. We'll see. Yeah. But at that point, that's where I'm leaning.
Yeah, and then those three are obviously the three big names that are not in the portal, but there's a bunch of big names in the portal that could get a ton of money. You'll get Jalen Wells, Jameer Watkins, and Coleman Hawkins. I think there's definitely a place in the league for Jalen Wells. I'm not quite certain that Jameer Watkins is an NBA player, but I think he can give it a shot. I'm not entirely sure what role Coleman Hawkins would have, but I think he could figure something out. And I think Hawkins is presumed to be back in school with how much money is rumored to be out there for him.
Coleman Hawkins also loves college basketball. He can say he doesn't, but he does.
Yeah, and Jameer Watkins is a guy that I loved him at VCU. I thought he was the most underrated player in the ACC at Florida State. I'm going to continue to pump his tires, assuming he's back in college. There hasn't really been any recruiting motion there because he's kind of been all in on the draft. But like, what type of market could you see him having?
Yeah, it'll be significant because he is kind of that Swiss Army knife, right? He's a bigger wing who can play make a little bit. He's not a non-shooter, right? I mean, that's been the biggest area of growth. I actually thought, going into the combine that there was a pretty good chance that if Jameer Watkins stayed in the draft, he would get more than a 2A. Like he would be pretty draftable. I still think that's probably the case. But again, if he feels like he can improve it and be a first round pick, like he's going to have to really think about that. Right. And so I know St. John's will be in the market. That has been one that has been discussed, quite frequently. Not sure who else will be. I think at some point you start to look around, it's like who has money left and who has a spot, right? So like, I think you poke at it, and you say, all right, like, just the way that Texas Tech just went big on top end, right? Like, who's the team that has wing money? Like could Kentucky go, big swing there if Jackson Robinson stays in the draft, right? Like that's one. That's one that I think would be a possibility. They're obviously unpopular. I would imagine Villanova will swing with everybody because they have spots and they have money. So, I think St. John's probably is like the most known one at the moment. But yeah, his recruitment is pretty quiet, and that's the case for a lot of guys, quite frankly. It was, obviously schools have tried to circumvent this and go through the agents and try to be involved in some form, fashion, or another. But I don't think a lot of these guys really have recruitments right now. Like, I don't think Arthur Kaluma has like, this is the market, this is where he's going. Maybe that's changed in the last couple of days as things have come into focus. But in most of these instances, from what I understand, talking to both the players and the staffs that could be involved, like there is not a lot of movement until they decide, hey, I'm actually going to come back, and then from there we can talk.
So the one I kind of wanted to ask about was Hunter Salas, because it truly feels like that one has been 50-50 the entire way. Like, really good year at Wake Forest. It was kind of expected just based on how Steve Forbes has had and dealt with transfer guards. But with Salas, do you think there's truly like one way he's leaning, or do you think like he's coming back to school? Like what's kind of been the vibe around Hunter Salas?
It's interesting. Like, I think it was truly like based on the feedback. It was going to be a feedback decision. Like, okay. Wake had the ability to pay him, so that wasn't going to be an issue. I don't think he was like sprinting to the league. I think coming into the draft, because he was one of those guys that could be like 20 to 40, right? Like, if he's going to be a first round pick, it's a lock that he's gone. If he falls a little and now he's 45, 50, that he's probably back. And I think his stock has probably slid more negative than positive throughout this process. Part of that is like I don't know why he didn't play in the scrimmages. Like, I thought that was a mistake. I think he had a chance to be one of the better guards out there, and help really boost his boost his standing. And the fact that he didn't, I was surprised by. Again, I'm not an agent, but if I was his, I would have told him to. I told him to go for it. So, I think right now I would lean probably 60-40 he's back. But this one does feel like a pretty big toss-up. Again, I think for a lot of these guys, it's like, can I get a promise? And if I can't get a promise that I'm getting picked, am I risking on draft night that I don't, or that I have to take a negotiated two-way in the late second round? And all of a sudden be in a spot where I'm not only getting less money, but I'm also in a worse situation than I would have been in college basketball. And I think for Hunter, like, he's a guy who can help himself, right? Like, Hunter Salas returning to school, having a big year, proving that this wasn't a fluke, taking Wake to the NCAA tournament, has a chance to be a late first round pick in 2025. Like, I don't think this is as good as it gets for him. Whereas with other guys, like, it is kind of a, when do you want to make the move? Like, I think there is some upside in going back if you're Hunter Salas.
Yeah, Salas is one of the, I would say, 3 or 4 that I'd think are most consequential for their team. The other one is being David Jones at Memphis, Nick Clifford at Colorado State, and Xavier Lee at Princeton. I listen to the No Ceilings podcasts all the time, and man, they love Nick Clifford over there. So I was honestly surprised when I opened up when I opened up your tweet and said, "Oh, Nick Clifford still hasn't figured it out yet." And I'm like, "Oh, I just frankly presumed he was long gone, because they're talking about him as, oh, you can swing on Nick Clifford in the lottery." And I'm like, okay, now that's a little rich for me. Yeah. But if he comes back, that's a scary defensive wing pair with him and Jalen Crocker Johnson, and he has the ability to be maybe an alpha type that Colorado State team really badly needs. Because I mean, right now, who's their alpha? Is it Bowen Bourne, who struggled in the Missouri Valley this year? And I see Jonathan's laughing.
If it is, it's not going to be a fun year.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's a big swing, right? Because I think if he's back, they have a chance to be an at-large team. with Bourne and Keyshawn Williams in the backcourt, along with Kyan Evans, who they really like as a sophomore. Jalen Lake, Crocker Johnson, Ethan Morton, Neek, all like 2 through 4 type players, and then Rashawn Bemba at the 5 as a rising sophomore with a lot of potential. Like that group is pretty talented, and that's Nico Medved's going to get the most out of it. So I do think this one has swung more Colorado State's direction in the last several days. Like I think at the combine, it was not seen as very likely that they could get him back. Like I was told that Colorado State was holding a spot for him, and had started to recruit for that 13th spot, and then sort of decided to hold off. Like they've started to feel as though so from what I understand, Neek doesn't want to get a 2-way. Like Neek wants a guaranteed contract to stay in the draft. So if that's what he wants after playing pretty poorly at the combine, then it's probably going to take someone promising him, because right now it feels really dicey to stay in if you don't just want to take a 2-way. So look, I think from Neek's standpoint, all of a sudden, hey, I might as well go back to Colorado State, get better. I think the other thing that Colorado State can sell is Isaiah Stevens was really bad at G League camp last year, 2023. And he came back, had obviously a phenomenal year, became a legend at Colorado State, whatever. And then this year was much better at G League camp. And I think there's even some marginal stuff of hey, with a full another year to get better and go out and be on the radar the whole year, not be a sleeper prospect that draft Twitter's tweeting about, but a guy that, everybody knows. To do that for a year and then go back when you're ready and you've been through this once before, he just looked tense out there. And I think if he gets another year, maybe it, helps him be just be more secure in next year's stock. Again, I think it could go either way. It's not quite like the Stevens situation last year where he was, a 4-year guy and loved Colorado State. Not that Neek doesn't love Colorado State. It's different, right? He's a 1-year kid, appreciative of what they did for him, what they helped him, rebuild his stock. He wasn't, wasn't highly thought of after the 3 years at Colorado. But I do still think that there's a belief among everyone that Colorado State gets guys better. And so if you're Neek, you have the opportunity to potentially, do that. I think that one is starting to lean in the Rams' favor, but we'll come down to the wire tomorrow.
Yeah. And then David Jones at Memphis. I mean, obviously Memphis has done a lot of work in the transfer portal, but David Jones, if he comes back, that's their best player. That's their continuity. That's a potential preseason player of the year in that league, and a borderline preseason All-American with how good he was this past season. He took over games for them, and just having any sort of continuity on that roster in terms of a guy that can go and get a bucket when you have plenty on that roster that can, but someone familiar with through that grind with Memphis and going through a year 2 in that program would just make me so much more confident in what they're building for this coming season. What do you think about Jones's stance for the NBA back at Memphis, and what would Memphis look like with or without?
Yeah, not someone that helped himself in Chicago. Measured under 6'4", which is tough for a wing. I think everyone knew he was going to measure small, but you were hoping it'd be closer to 6'5" than 6'3", and it wasn't. And then just pretty erratic in the scrimmages, right? If he's going to carve out a role in the NBA, it's going to be 3-and-D. It's not going to be what it is at Memphis, where he can has so much free reign. I think he was put in the difficult position, as so many guys are in that setting, where you make a couple of mistakes early on and then you press to get it back. And he just instead of getting it back, he made it worse and kept digging. And at some point, you kind of got to put the shovel down and make the right play. I do think he'll be back in Memphis eventually. Again, he's a big time college basketball player because he's a big time shooter. He's obviously got size to go rebound and be physical. Again, doesn't measure that way, but is someone who's physically ready to go, battle for boards as a bigger wing 4. And Memphis's team around him, is pretty promising, right? I mean, Tyrese Hunter, I think is a good addition. This group needed winning DNA. And that's one thing that, quite frankly, the one thing David Jones has never done is win. Yeah. He's been on 3 teams, and all of them have kind of spectacularly combusted. And so I think putting around him guys that are maybe a little bit more proven, have been around good programs like a Tyrese Hunter, I think think really helps. And then, some of the young guys they went out and got with the Koji and
Haggerty.
PJ Haggerty. Yeah, thank you. I think that helps. Dane Danger as a post scorer. Still work to do. Memphis tends
Sienna
to
legend Colby Rogers.
Oh yeah, of course. Right. Big time shooter. I look, their talent will be the best in the American. It always will be under Penny. And the question is, can he get the most of it? We'll see. But I'm cautiously optimistic, as I am every year this time with Memphis, and certainly getting Jones back would help quite a bit.
Very kind of general question here, but we talked a little about how the money in college basketball has truly made some of these more decisions, not just 50-50, but swinging back towards going back to college. With this draft being like not as top heavy as it is, and I guess lack of talent is a good way to put it compared to previous drafts. Are there some players / agents that kind of think the other way, where it's like, okay, maybe there's a couple teams there that like this kid, I'll test my luck and go in the draft, and maybe I'll go higher than you would think?
Yeah, I think that thinking was probably more salient for guys who were, debating whether they should enter the draft altogether, right? Like guys who could have been like if you're a Devin Carter, right? And if you were going to be projected 30th, could you do like the whole test the waters thing? In this draft, you might go 15th, and like that's a no-brainer. You have to go now. Like you're not going to get better than that, right? I don't think as many of these guys who are again projected more in the second round range. I don't think it's as big of a deal. Partially because I don't think the depth of this draft is its problem. Like I think there's a lot of guys in that 20 to 45 range that are interesting enough. Like I don't think that's the part of this draft that has people kind of bemoaning it. It's really the lack of top end talent. So I think probably less of a factor. I will say like there has been a lot of upward mobility to be had in this draft. Like if you played well and you tested well, like could you play your way from like borderline first round into the lottery conversation? I think yes. Unfortunately, like it doesn't really feel like any of the college returner types, at least unfortunately for them, it didn't feel like any of those guys really had those moments, right? Like I could have seen a world, and Sam mentioned off the top, where a guy like Caravan had that type of pre-draft, where everyone was like, this guy is all about the right stuff. He makes shots. He's been around winning. Like, we need to have him. Let's go get him in the early 20s. And at that point, like UConn wouldn't have been able to hold him. I think it's a little different, with him having kind of a mediocre combine performance. It didn't like add the gasoline to the fire that I think a lot of people might have hoped for.
Yeah, and another one that I actually didn't mention earlier, Peyton Sandfort, didn't exactly help his stock as some other guys have also not really helped their stock. But bringing him back to Iowa would be really big, because that's a program that's so big on internal development, has been over the past decade plus under Fran, and it really feels like they're one piece away from being they're like a Peyton Sandfort away from being a legit Big Ten contender. They bring back Brock Harding and Owen Freeman, who both showed really good flashes as freshmen. Josh Dix can take a real step forward. Seydou Traore is a physical wing that kind of has like a very Walmart version of like the Murray twin build, with that ball handling ability. And then Sandfort coming back would be an all Big Ten first team ish type player. That and Drew Thelwell too from Morehead State, who's been around winning and is a really good point guard. This team has a lot, and if they bring Sandfort back, they could be a contender for that top 2-3 range in the Big Ten. Yeah,
I'm probably a little lower, like team wide on you or on Iowa, than you are. Not to say that I think they could be pretty good. I do think they could be very much improved defensively by adding Traore, a guy who really rebounds and is a little bit more versatile and athletic than they were dealing with Ben Krikke. Like I think Traore and Freeman up front is a pretty good defensive look, and Dix is a pretty solid defender, better athlete. I think probably talent wise still a little bit underwhelming compared to the top of Big Ten, and always a defensive concern with France teams. They've never been great on that end of the floor at Iowa, at least. And I think they'll be better. I think they'll be improved. I don't know how much improved. I think, it certainly would be in the range of outcomes, though, if he comes back. I know a lot of excitement about the freshman Chris Taggio. I think he was an NBA Academy kid. Harding is a guy who could get better. Certainly a really dynamic, fun little point guard. As you said, the player development at Iowa has been phenomenal. I mean, look, I think pretty much every year for the last 5, they've had an early entry NBA guy, which is pretty remarkable, especially in the way that they recruit. Because last year, Chris, year before Keegan, year before that, Wieskamp was in with, a year left. And so this would be 4 straight years. And, even before that, I think they've had some guys who've just proven to get better, whether it's Luka, whether it's, Tyler Cook back in the day. Like you could work your way down. Like that is one thing that Fran has done a phenomenal job at. And Sanford, the latest example. I thought, the physicality was a problem for him at the combine. Something he's going to have to be, more well adjusted to if he wants to stick in the NBA. That's why I think, maybe another year helps him. His frame will always be his frame. Like he's always going to be on the leaner side, but can he, learn a little bit about how to use his body more effectively, how to get a little bit stronger, and give himself a bit of a boost, because so much for these shooter, specialist types. It's really about can you enter the right situation at the right time? Sam Hauser entered the perfect situation at the right time, with the Celtics, and turns into a pro. But I think was probably a guy that not a lot of people believed in coming out of Marquette, or excuse me, I guess Virginia at the end. That was the COVID year. That was a weird one. But I think, bigger picture, you want to wind up in a great situation. And so if you're Sanford, the more you do in college, the more you can kind of engineer that situation for yourself by boosting your stock.
Sam, do you want to ask about Walter Clayton?
Yeah. So Florida, Walter Clayton and Will Richard coming back to Florida to join Elijah Martin in that backcourt. They brought in Sam Alexis, Ruben Chinelu from Washington State. Even though they're not going to have Micah Hanlockton all of next year, this team could have legit upside just based on the star power in that backcourt. What's your stance on the Gators right now?
Yeah, I think, so much of it relies on Alex Condon being the type of dude that I think they believe he can be. The flashes with him are ridiculous. I mean, to have his size, his mobility, his two-way gifts in terms of protect the rim, rebound, finish around the basket, stretch it occasionally. Like he's super talented. And for them to reach their ceiling, I mean, look, I think Sam Alexis and Chinyelu were both, important pickups and, guys that can play in the SEC, but I don't think either was recruited to be, hey, this is this is the scoring front court player, the way that Tyrese Samuel was. I think they're relying on Condon to be that, and he has to step up. As far as the backcourt, the Martin addition's great. I think they'll be a lot better defensively this year. Point guard play, well, I think Clayton's probably going to slide over there. I think it's a different look for him, and I'm curious to see how he handles that. I would love to see them add one more guard. I know they've been in the market. We're involved with some of the bigger international names that have come off the board here recently. At one point or another, they were in the mix with some of those guys. Have kind of poked at the portal names that are left. I don't think there's another $1 million floating around for the Gators to go spend. I don't think that they're likely to be a huge player with one of the main portal names, but wouldn't be surprised if they find a way to slot in another international guard, and see if it can strike magic the way they did with Condon a year ago.
Yeah, and you make a good point about Clayton at the one. It was something Rick Pitino had mentioned when Clayton was at Iona, that DJ played better with Walt and Walt played better with DJ. They played off each other a lot. And then when Zion Pullen was suspended the first 3 games for Portsmouth this past year, Clayton kind of struggled. He didn't really play well in the first couple games of the season. And then he comes back, and the second game that Pullen plays, Walt has 28 points against Pitt because he doesn't really have to shoulder the ball handling responsibility. But I do think Elijah Martin and Will Richard can both handle the ball enough. Those are 3 guards that can definitely play with the ball in their hands. But I do think they could use a bench guard for sure. I mean, how much do we believe in Denzel Aberdeen right now?
They believe quite a lot in Denzel.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. I understand your skepticism there.
He had his moments.
I think there's probably, I think the vision with Elijah Martin is for him to be kind of a Marcus Smart type of player for them.
Interesting.
Maybe not Oklahoma State Marcus Smart, but at least like Celtics Marcus Smart.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking they're gonna add the Big 12 Player of the Year.
Hey, you never know. Like, coaches are very optimistic in May. So,
yeah, I mean,
what next, Sam? I was thinking
Chaz
maybe we go to
Lanier,
some of the portal guys.
yeah, Chaz Lanier just committed to Tennessee last week, and like he's really good. I'll preface this by saying he's a really good addition, but like there's way too much of like a Dalton Connect trope to the discourse around him. Just because Dalton Connect went from a Big Sky all second teamer to, in my eyes, one of the 3 or 4 best players in this draft class, doesn't mean everybody can do that. Chaz Lanier is a good guard that can shoot and get to the basket. He's
the same thing was kind of happening with Kobe Brea when he was in the portal.
Yeah, I think that people love the idea, but the reality of the situation for Chaz Lanier is he's a really good like second or third piece for an SEC team. Then I think Tennessee has a bunch of guys that can get a bucket now. With him and Dubar, I think that's 2 guys in the starting lineup that you can give the ball to and they can get a bucket. So it's not like they're lacking for scoring, but Lanier is much more of a good addition than a holy crap, this could be Dalton Connect. And I think Tennessee is a top 5, top 10 team regardless, because I trust Rick Barnes to develop guys and bring in the right mix as he's done over the past few years. And I think Felix Okpara is a terrific addition. I love Dubar, as previously mentioned. He's one of my favorite players in the country, and he was last year too. And I think Igor Milicic is a fun one, and Zakai Ziegler. It's now year 4 for Zakai Ziegler. Like, this is an experienced SEC point guard who makes his teammates better.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to undersell Zakai here. Zakai averaged 14, 7, and 2 steals in the SEC last year once he was healthy off the ACL. Like he's like a top 3 to 5 guy for Bob Cousy next year. He's one of the best players in the country. It's a great place to start. I don't think Tennessee needs Chaz to be their best player. I think they already have that. Zakai. I think the one thing that's similar with Chaz to Dalton, and this is before Tennessee was going to get him. I mean, I think I kind of first came across Chaz in like serious fashion when I was like doing pre-portal research in February. Like I knew like, oh, this guy's pretty good. Like I didn't really watch him. And so I think the thing you notice with him, like when you watch Dalton Connect, like before you even know who Dalton Connect is, you're like, oh, that guy moves like a dude. Like you're like, okay, like there's just that like it factor that certain guys have, and he like Dalton always had that. And there's a lot of guys who have it factor who don't turn into, you know, an elite 20 plus point per game college scorer at, you know, on a top 5 to 10 team in the country. But like, I think Chaz has that. Like he's bigger. He can really, really shoot. He's bouncy. Like he had 24 dunks last year as a guard. Like that's really, really high. You know, he was still finding his footing at the G League camp, but I do think he has the potential to be like, I think if the median outcome is him averaging 12 points a game and shooting 40% from 3, that's a great get.
Yeah.
And if that's the median, that means there's another 50% out there that he's 15, 16, 17 points a game, like maybe like a leading scorer level player. And him being a leading scorer level player is not Dalton Connect, because no one's going to be Dalton Connect. I mean, Rick Barnes said 2 wing scorers like that in his career, Dalton Connect and Kevin Durant. Like the expectation that Chaz Lanier is going to roll in and be that, it's not fair. But I think big picture with Tennessee, to have added a 44% 3-point shooter in Chaz Lanier, a 40% 3-point shooter in D-Stone Dubar, a 38% three-point shooter at 6'10", and Igor Milicic. Bring back Cam Carr, who didn't play a lot as a freshman, but is like I
He's
think
good.
he will be an NBA prospect this time next year.
Sam and I both liked him when he was coming out of high school.
Ridiculous shooter. I watched him warm up at the NCAA tournament in Charlotte, like on their shoot around day, and I was like, holy crap, like, can this guy shoot? Like, he is going to be like, I when we're doing draft decisions this time next year, we will be talking about Cam Carr. There's my like weird prediction of the day.
Okay.
So like they can surround Zakai with a ton of shooting and surround him with, give him a lob threat in Akpara. That's pretty dangerous. So that's why I think they're probably a top 10 type team. I do think the top 10 is really strong. I have 12 teams for 10 spots at the moment. As I work for my way too early that I think will go probably on Thursday or something like that. But I do think Tennessee certainly belongs in that conversation, and Lanier is certainly a big reason why.
Yeah, I think I also have about 12 or 13 teams that I think could be top 10. Yeah, and you mentioned it. The one thing that I did notice looking at Lanier is like Connect shattered ceilings like at each level within 2 years. It did take Chaz Lanier 4 years to really get off the ground at North Florida. Do you think that's a cause for concern at all?
I don't think it's a red flag. Like, if anything, I think it's sort of it's something I'm probably makes me more interested in him. Like, because you start to wonder, like, what happened. Like, I truly can't remember a player of his on his trajectory. Like, was truly nothing but a standing corner shooter. Like, probably a guy that if he had, like, honestly, if Chaz Lanier went in the portal a year ago, he might have went Division II.
Oh yeah. Looking
like
at some of the guys that I've seen going Division II out of the MAC. Yeah.
4.5 points per game on a bad A Sun team. Like, he would have been D2, or he would have been like MEAC SWAC, like really, really low. And instead, here we are at Tennessee. Like, something changed, right? Like with his game, and they empowered him, and he took off. And so, I think it sells kind of a late bloomer story that I'm sort of interested in. Like, I think with some of these guys where, it's like, man, like, where it was, you got really good and then they stagnated a little bit. Like, I still think there's room to grow at Chaz. I think that's the thing that would probably excite me.
The next guy I wanted to ask about was Cam Christie, because like this is like one of those, I don't know if I'd call it 50-50, but like he's a player who had a really good freshman year at Minnesota on a team that was like decent, probably better than expected, and now he's like in the portal. Like, Minnesota didn't have like the NIL probably to like bring him back, but like he's probably going to have a pretty big market if he does come back, and will definitely be in like the like million to like $1.2 million kind of range, I would imagine.
Yeah, to me, like, Cam is the one guy I would be shocked came back. Like, of all the NBA, portal or pro guys, Cam would be the one where I'd be like, wow, because I know it's like his stock hasn't been quite as linear as some people thought. Like, but I'm very sure he gets drafted if he stays in the draft. His brother is a good example of someone who got drafted like as a one and done, carved out a place in the league. He wants to be in the NBA. Like, I don't think he entered the portal to go chase a bag. Like, I think he did it to keep his doors open in case anything bad happens. Like, again, it makes sense for these guys to wait it out and see what offers come. And maybe there's a Godfather offer out there for Cam Christie. I'm a huge believer in his game. But to me, like, I think we'll see him stay in the draft tomorrow.
Yeah. And then I think Xavier Lee probably comes back, but I do want to talk about Princeton, because I'm going to talk about the Ivy League. It's the obligatory Ivy League mention on the show. And look, it's hard to say Princeton isn't the favorite next year when they're most likely returning what's probably the two best players in the conference at this point, because this is player of the year Caden Pierce and Xavier Lee, who's also a first teamer and was terrific scorer, gets to the basket. And then Dalen Davis will take a step up as a sophomore. The one thing is it's a very small wing group with Davis and Blake Peters. And we don't know what Devin Austin's going to look like coming back from the ACL injury. But the Ivy League honestly feels down next year because guys like Danny Wolf can now leave the league early and get a big NIL bag at Michigan.
Yeah, look, I think you're right that Princeton should be the favorite. I think they're a team that, quite frankly, could be in the top 50 to 75 range again, particularly given how good Lee and Cade Pierce are. Like, Caden Pierce is, like, ridiculous, man. Like, he is probably the most underrated mid-major player in the country because they had so much talent, right? And there was always attention about Lee, obviously the attention to Alaco as the veteran of the group who'd been around it. Like, Caden Pierce, like, the numbers he put up.
Player of the year.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, he's the quietest player of the year in the world. Like, I think everybody talked about everybody else, and it was him. And he was even better, in league play. In league play, he was 18.5, 9.5, 3.5, shot 41 from three, like 53 from the field. Like, come on. Like, he's a stud. So you're right about the wing size. I would watch Malik Abdullahi. He's a really good high school player coming in. Again, usually takes these guys 2 years at Princeton, especially with the system and everything. But he's a guy I could see getting on the floor early and finding a way into the rotation as like a bigger kind of wing forward type piece. And I think Pierce gives you a lot of flexibility because of how he rebounds. Like, can he be a small? Like, realistically, he was sort of their five. I think they would probably call Martini their five, but like he was rebounding like a five. And so, it's going to be create some interesting matchups. Like, I guess I can like sort of like half break some news here. Like, they're going to play Loyola pretty early in the season. That's like a pretty good. Like, Loyola is a huge team. Like, they're at Princeton actually.
Ooh,
kudos to.
Hopefully that's Thanksgiving week. I want to go to that.
I believe it's not, but you don't quote me on it. But no, I think it'd be like something like that will be a great early matchup for them to see like how do they deal with a team that has a ton of like size and length. But I'm excited about it. Like, I think they have a chance to be really good. And again, the development, the guys have gone on from year one to year two. Like this time last year, Xavier Lee was like a breakout candidate, and now he's damn near an NBA player.
NBA prospect, yeah.
Right. Like,
I mean, and Loyola is a team that Jonathan and I are both very high, and I think we both think that's the top team in the A10 at the moment. The A10, the top of the A10 looks solid. The bottom of the A10 is a total dumpster fire. A total dumpster fire.
Who are we defining as the bottom here?
I mean, like,
it's like the bottom, like 5 or 6. Because like there are some like okay teams in like the middle of the league.
So it's like LaSalle you're showing as a dumpster fire.
Yeah. LaSalle doesn't look good. GW doesn't look good.
I think you can talk yourself into like GW though. Like
GW's got some more talent. I think.
Johnson, like, they sort of blew up at the end of last year, but like Johnson Buchanan are like legit dudes, and then they have they went and portaled out some guards. Like I think the only teams that I'm like, oh man, that might be pretty ugly this year are. LaSalle
URI is not in a good spot either.
I'm like,
they already tried the Sebastian Thomas experiment. I don't want to say it again.
You're correct, but like again, like I think a lot of times like you're trying to figure out like how's like where's the hope coming from? Like I look at URI, I'm like, well, like their backcourt should be a lot better than it was last year. Jamarcus Lawrence helps them. Thomas is better than Courtwright. We know this. Like David Green for a full year. Fuchs is back. Estevez could break out. Like I can squint and see a good team here. Like I think I don't think
Ramaglu going to start for Richmond.
He might. I was actually going through that the other day. Like they have so many small guards. They have GW the third, Delani Hunt, and Michael Tyne, who are all like 6'1" and below. So like at some point you can't start 3 of them. So I guess like Pastos might have to start because like I think they'll start Dushan at the 4. Beagle at the 5.
And I'm not sure how much I like that front court. Like they're 2 guys that were high scorers, but their teams were awful.
Correct. Those guys have not been around winning and have like some bad habits.
And then there's Apostolos who averaged 0.3
been around a lot of winning
garbage time.
Been around a ton of winning.
Been around a lot of winning. Yeah.
Before we move off of Princeton, I do want to mention that they could technically throw out a lineup next year with like 4 Chicagoland area kids on the floor at the same time.
Oh yeah, they recruit out here a lot.
Yeah, most of the Ivies do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Ivies are big recruiting.
Where did Jack Stanton go? Glenbar? No.
Jack Stanton went to Downers Grove North. I saw him play.
Yes,
I saw him play in person this year. He'll be very good at Princeton.
Yeah, that was the right level. He was like when Stanford offered him, I was like, oh no, Jared Haas, what are you doing, pal? But Princeton's the right level.
Well, there were a lot of moments where I was like, oh God, Jared Haas, what are you doing?
True. This is true.
To be fair, Stanford, I mean, Kyle Smith's roster at Stanford isn't something that I'm particularly impressed by.
It's far worse than any of the recent Stanford rosters.
Yeah, so it's just a really, really difficult job because the academic standards are so high.
I've said this on some other podcasts. I talked to someone who's very involved in like the high academic Pac-12 scene. They told me they were
Cal and USC, and
they told me they were once told from someone at Stanford that they went through and looked at the transcripts of all 55 other Pac-12 starters. I think this was probably 2 or 3 years ago now. So, there's 60 starters in the league, 5 at Stanford, and 55 elsewhere. They went through the 55 starters as transcripts, and 2 of them got into Princeton or got into Stanford, could have gotten into Stanford. Like that's how limited they are in terms of who they can recruit. So, yeah, if you're Kyle Smith and you can get you get whoever you can get, you take. So
yeah.
I remember listening to a podcast a while back that David Shaw told someone that the former Stanford football coach that if you took the ESPN top 300 football players in a class, Stanford would be able to recruit 30 of them, which would have been insane for a football team.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's the challenge of it, right? It's a completely different world than even it is as hard as the Ivies, in some cases even harder than the Ivies, and you have to play against much harder competition. It's not Northwestern, it's not Vanderbilt, you can't get. It's not Cal. Cal took 8 transfers this year. Stanford's taken 8 transfers ever. So
yeah, Cal took 8 transfers, and I'm not sure how many of them are good, but they certainly took a lot of transfers.
Reedus is good.
Yeah, I think
Stojakovic is good. JOJ is good.
We said on the last podcast that Madi Sissoko is closer to a point guard than he is to an all-conference player.
Well, that wasn't very nice.
No, it wasn't. It was just funny.
Fair enough.
This stemmed from someone on Twitter last year saying that Madi Sissoko would be an all Big Ten player this year at Michigan State. And what did I say, Sam? I quoted it and said I would write a 3-page essay on how well run the Memphis program is if that happens.
Good take.
All right, yeah. We haven't even gotten to Caleb Love. And Arizona is probably a top 5 team if he comes back. That's a backcourt with Jaden Bradley. KJ Lewis is already back, and they've added beef to that front court with Townsend and Awaka coming in, and that already joins a 7-2 Mo Crevis, who showed real flashes last year. That could be a legitimately the top of the Big 12 with Arizona, Houston, Kansas, and Iowa State, and then Baylor is a little bit a half tier below that for me.
I think I would have Baylor probably ahead of Arizona right now, but I think it's close. I think the thing that's notable with Arizona, and I do think Caleb will come back, mostly because I don't think he really has a choice. But Arizona's physicality is going to be really interesting with Bradley and Lewis in the backcourt, Townsend and Awaka in the front court. Those are street fight dudes. And Caleb can go make shots. Delorso should be able to space it for them. Carter Bryant and Crevis are good young players. Sannon has been. There's been some rumors of him potentially jumping off the ship. We'll see if he does or not. Even if he does, they have enough depth.
He hasn't even officially reclassed. He's playing in EYBL. So
yeah, I have him on my sheet for next year, but I'm not convinced we'll see him. But they don't really need him if Caleb's back. So
yeah, and I'm not even sure how much they would need him if Caleb Love didn't come back, because I think you can slide Lewis over, DeLorso over.
Yeah, you probably just
like,
don't. You probably want
Bryant.
one more guy who can like really score.
Yeah,
Because
and like that's what Sandin really is. He's just really a talented scorer.
Yeah, agreed.
And I think Caleb Love kind of became more than that last year. I thought he was better defensively this past year than he was at Carolina, and better as a playmaker.
He deserves a lot of credit for the defensive stuff. Like, he's a much better defender than people give him credit for. He works on that end of the floor like really, really aggressively. Like his motor is really good. It's just, the shooting is just so inconsistent, and that's like the one skill that's getting him on the floor.
Yeah, like he's a college scorer. He's not an NBA scorer.
Yes, agreed.
Jonathan, do you have any other names?
I don't think so. I'm kind of just scrolling through the names right now. I wanted to see if there was anything else, but I don't think I do.
I mean, I just kind of, there's a bunch of names like that and teams that I want to get into a little bit that we haven't gotten into, more from the team perspective than the name perspective. I think UConn can be just fine without Alex Karaban. But it would definitely be a bit of a shock just to the system to see a UConn team with nobody from the starting lineup return after returning 2 starters and a key reserve last year. It would be definitely a shock to the system to have to see, McNeely at the 4 from day one with Stewart at the 3. But I think that would work.
Yeah, I mean, again, like what are we saying is like fine, right? Like if UConn's probably like a top 25 team, but nothing more than that if they don't have Karaban. And again, I think if you really read the roster and you're like,
I think they could be a lot higher than that without.
I think people will put them there because of Hurley, and I don't blame anyone for doing that. But I think roster wise, like I think if you're truly blinded yourself and you were like, they have Hassan Diarra, Aiden Mahaney, Liam McNeely, Jalen Stewart, and Terrace Reed, like you don't. I don't think anyone like actually believes that's like a top 10 roster in the country.
Yeah, but I mean, you can look at the player development that these guys have had over the past few years.
Oh, no question.
Jalen Stewart has already gotten a lot of buzz. I think next year at this time, this is a guy we'll be talking about on this show next year, Jalen Stewart. I think Hassan Diarra has been a key reserve for 2 national championship teams. Aiden Mahaney has been one of the best players on a really good St. Mary's team each of the last 2 years. And I honestly think Liam McNeely has a similar aspect to Karaban in his game as a 6'7" kid who shoots the crap out of the ball and is really controlled getting to the basket. I think you can kind of not replicate, but you can aspire to that mold. You're not getting that level of production from Karaban that you get from Karaban in McNeely, but I think you can get a similar type of a role, and it would definitely require more out of Stewart if Karaban didn't come back. But I wouldn't be surprised if Stewart is like an all Big East type player.
Offensively, I think you can get just as much out of McNeely as a freshman as you were getting out of Karaban. Like obviously he was in a somewhat limited role based on who else they had, but like McNeely can do what Karaban did. I think the difference is Karaban was so good on the defensive end, like all year for them.
He was really good defensively.
Yeah, I think the main concern I have with a potential Karaban-less UConn, and quite frankly, a UConn with Karaban, is like they run their stuff at such a high level, and they put so much in, like from a playbook standpoint, and you can recruit high character kids, you can recruit smart kids, you can recruit elite processors. I think that's kind of their secret sauce, is they've recruited elite processors. But asking four new starters to like figure it all out and just like have it be that smooth. And I guess I'm calling Reed a starter instead of Samson Johnson or whatever. Like again, you can like semantically, but like a significant portion of your rotation, including all of your best players being new to that system, I think is like a pretty challenging ask. Like I think it's probably been overlooked, the value last year of it being Newton's back, Diarra's back, Karaban's back, Klingen's back. Like that level of continuity was massive for them, and so it was plugging in individual parts. And the more guys you lose, and I think especially if you lose Caravan, you feel more like you're rebuilding and you're learning instead of you're fitting into your little role. And I think that would be what would worry me with UConn. Not that I don't think they can be really good. I think they will. I think I'll have them somewhere probably between 4 and 7 if Caravan comes back at worst, and probably 17 to 22 if he doesn't at worst. Might be higher than that just because of the Hurley factor.
I think UConn Twitter won't like that.
They're welcome to feel however they want to feel.
Yeah. I'm just saying, be ready.
I mean, I hope we don't get to that point. Is what I would say. But
yeah.
I think he'll be back. So
yeah, North Carolina adding Van Allen Lubin just makes me feel so much better about this team, because it's he's not like an elite big man, but he's a real big man.
Yeah, I think they needed somebody, right? And I do think if they don't, I think there is a chance we will look back on this spring for Carolina and say them not getting Cliff or Adu or someone like that cost them a real chance of winning the title. I think there's a chance of that, but you had to go get someone. You got someone who's played at the high major level for 2 years, that's produced, that has a little bit of versatility, that you could theoretically still recruit over if you get if Onyenso becomes a possibility, or whichever big is left out there. I know there's not a whole lot, but Coleman Hawkins, if they want to go out and drop a bag there, something like that, right? There's enough positional versatility that Lubin possesses that it doesn't completely destroy the team. But yeah, it was necessary. I don't think he's going to change their team. I think their team is still RJ and it's glue guys and it's space and it's length and athleticism and shooting. But it's they needed somebody who could be a post threat. And I think you have to hope that Lubin is that guy.
Yeah. And I think that I don't really think Hawkins would be as big of an addition as Onyenso would for this group, considering I think that Lubin's already kind of an undersized big, and Hawkins does more, but Lubin does similar things in a way. And I think Onyenso just being maybe the best rim protector in the country and a guy that can play. You don't need him to play 30 minutes a night, because Hawkins is going to want to play 30 minutes a night. And I don't think that would really make Carolina better, 30 minutes of Hawkins versus 30 minutes of I
think displacing a little Cade Tyson or something like that probably does help them. Give them size, more defense.
I love Drake Powell. I think Drake Powell can step in and be a day one contributor with his physicality.
Is he playing the 4?
Yeah, he can be a 4.
He should.
He's a legit 6'7" with strength. I think he can play the 4. It is a small backcourt. Ian Jackson at the 3 is he's definitely more of a 2, I would say, but you're going to want him on the court. He's that good.
I think the one thing I would say is we shouldn't completely overestimate the factor that it's still Carolina, and Carolina loves their bigs. Yes, it's Hubert, it's not Roy, but they love their bigs. And so I know they played a little smaller this year, but I don't think we're going to magically snap our fingers and all of a sudden it's hey, look, we have a 6'6" freshman playing the 4 all the time, and we're happy with that. I do think they're going to want some physicality and size. And
yeah, we'll still see Washington at the 4. I think a decent amount, or Withers at the 4 a little bit. I don't think Powell's. I don't think Powell's a 30-minute a game freshman. I think that I just think he's a contributor, and I think that they have a lot of pieces, and they finally got a piece that I think is a legit 5 at the high major level in Lubin, and just makes me feel so much better about where they stand.
Yep.
Texas Tech today added JT Toppin. They're not asking him to play the 5, are they? Because I know Tech fans are oh, we need a 5. They were in on a lot of different 5s, but They ended up kind of sticking with Federico. They're not asking Toppin to play the 5, right?
I imagine he'll play some 5. I don't think it's an issue
so
either.
4 will be kind of his primary spot.
I think you needed to tell him he was a 4, or otherwise he wasn't going to come. Like, the sell with him as a pro is that he's a 6'8", 6'9", shot, spacing, big rebounds that rebound his tail off, and so he's going to have to play a lot of 4. I think it'll probably I don't think Federico is playing more than 25 minutes a game though, 20, 25 minutes a game. So the Toppin's going to cover the other 15, and I think you have all these like bigger combo forwards with Williams and Cambridge, and even like an Overton who's like 6'5", 6'6", and versatile. Like, I think they're going to have to find ways to play smaller with Toppin at the 5 and space it. Like, I think that's how Grant McCasland wants to play long term is to have the versatility. And so I do think that we're going to see a lot of that. I don't know, again, how is it going to all shake out, like starting lineup? Like, I imagine JT will start at the 4, but I would not be at all surprised if he winds up being your closing 5. And I think that's a great situation for him because, like maybe some people will kind of rough him up a little bit physically, but like that dude is a monster on the glass and a monster rim protector. And if you look at the 5s in that league, really with the exception of Hunter Dickinson, there's not a lot of like I'll just scroll through my charts right now.
Previs is a big dude,
right? But like, how many? The thing you have to the thing I always have to take a step back on is like, how many of these guys am I like afraid of beating me with post ups every trip down the floor? And if I'm not afraid of that, right? Like if I'm not afraid of that, okay, like Tobe Awaka, beat me with post ups, please. Jaden Cainton's at Arizona State, beat me with post ups. Josh Ojanwuna, beat me with post ups. I guess Omir will be like the post up guy for Baylor, so that's fine, whatever. Like Omir can probably put him under the rim, but he does that to everyone, and JT Toppin can block a shot. He's long. Keba Keita, beat me with post ups. Aziz Bandego.
Traore is really interesting as a post-up player, but he's still small.
Who are you saying is a post-up player?
Traore is a really interesting when he posts up.
Foos Traore, sure,
yeah, but like he's also 6'6",
and he's coming off, and he's going to come off the bench, I think, with this group.
Yeah,
with the way they're
built.
But
like he was always a 20-ish minute a game guy when they had Khalifa. So I don't.
Again, it's like not going to destroy your team though, right? Bandego, Elijah Malone, Javier Francis, Deshaun Jackson, Hunter Dickinson, great. David N'Gassan, Abu Usman, Ernest Uday, Rokas Joshu, Lawson Lovering, Amani Hansberry. Live with it, right? JT Toppin can defend those guys.
That's Sam, is that a Lawson Lovering mention on back-to-back shows?
Didn't think we'd ever get here. I know Jonathan's really high in Texas Tech. I'll let him go in a minute, but I'll let him go on that in a minute. But I did a T-rank query today. Usage freshman on an NCAA tournament team with a usage rate over 18%, an offensive rating above 125, offensive rebounding over 10, defensive rebounding over 20, and a block rate over 5. There's 4 guys: Kevin Love, DeAndre Ayton, Anthony Davis, and JT Toppin.
Pretty good.
It really is. That's really impressive. And Toppin also is a better shooter than Davis and Ayton were in college.
Yes.
Obviously,
he's going to shoot. Like, people don't realize it because he didn't make free throws. Like, he is really going to shoot.
Yeah, and that team, Jonathan, this is your line. Go.
Yeah, I just think this team's really well constructed. Like, you got your point guard, who's one of the best passers in not just the Big 12, but probably the country, in Elijah Hawkins. And then you just have a bunch of like shooters slashers, I should say. And at your wings, adding Toppin was kind of like the cherry on top. And then you have your rim protector with Federico inside. Like, I don't think they're like super deep. So like, I would worry right now about injuries, but they have, I believe, 2 spots left to fill still. And they already have like 8 guys that I like, 9 guys that I like.
Yeah, they've got a really good 8, and then they have Christian Anderson as a freshman who I think can play 10 minutes a game as like a scoring point guard.
His ranking has like shot down since his like sophomore year of high school, I want to say. But like he had a really good year at Oak Hill.
Yeah, I watched him at Oak Hill. He's a good player. Like he can play at that level. I watched him at Basketball at the Border. Same thing. Good player. Like can play at that like he can eat 5 to 10 minutes if he has to.
Yeah, I think Texas Tech is one of those teams that people will be talking about all year as like, oh, they could make a run, they could be really dangerous, and then like I don't know what's going to end up happening to them in the tournament, but like they're going to be like the team that sneaks up on the casual fan in March. I think maybe because I don't think like I don't look at this team and say, oh, there's a superstar here, they can be a top 10-ish team, but I definitely think that there's potential of like a peaking late because they have a lot of pieces that that I think can come together in a good way.
They'll probably be like the 5th or 6th most talked about team in that league too.
Yeah, I have them 6th in the Big 12 and like 14th nationally.
That checks out.
Yeah. And oh my God, the teams below them on the Big 12 sheet, UCF and Utah, like those rosters are just. What UCF is really fascinating to me, and I want to get your take on this because they took like 3 or 4 guys that were like that had been kicked off of their previous team. Like, I know like Johnny Dawkins has like has a good reputation with those types of guys in the past, but like. That seems a little excessive to me. Would you agree?
Yeah, look, I think the thing you walk into when like I would not envy anyone having that job right now because I don't think there's a huge amount of resources financially compared to their Big 12 opponents. There's certainly nothing to sell from a fan support angle. There's nothing to sell from like a history. Like it's probably the worst job in that league. Other than maybe BYU, which is in sort of an avenue of its own because of the LDS factor, right? Like, so you got to find like fan base. Yeah, they have fans, like they have a huge support, and that's UCF doesn't, right? So like, you had to find a way to get talent in there somewhere. Like I thought they were better than I thought they would be last year, but they didn't have enough dudes, so they came up short. And so I think this is sort of their like, all right, like Keyshawn Hall, like you're,
that's a dude.
You've been a pain, but you're a dude, right? Like we'll roll the dice here. Like Jordan Ivy-Curry, you marfoed once, transferred again, had your had your agent like screw things up in the release, so then you had to go fire him, then bring him back, get someone hired on the staff at UCF to go there after you were originally going to go to Virginia Tech. Like again, it's a little messy, but like, hey, average 17 a game in the American. Like let's roll the dice, people. Like again, this is the spot you're in. Again, it definitely has some. It definitely seems combustible, but the roster is probably it's less. It's not as bad as Utah's roster. It's probably more talented than West Virginia's. I would take West Virginia's like team over it, but I think they're probably more talented. They're probably more talented than Oklahoma State. They're probably like you probably did the job if you were Johnny Dawkins to give yourself talent that isn't at the bottom of your league.
Yeah, and the funny thing is the 2 guys that you mentioned were not the 3 guys who were kicked off their team.
Yeah, they were functionally kicked off, but the guys who were actually kicked off, I'll allow you to.
Benny Williams, JJ Taylor, and Mikey Williams for various reasons.
I think Mikey Williams is probably only at UCF because Dawkins was trying to prevent himself from getting fired, and he thought if he could bring in like a 5-star at the mid-year, it would be like a big deal. And then
this will look good to the boosters,
right? I think that was honestly a big part of it. I mean, again, I don't know anything like specific about it, but like that was certainly speculated a lot about in industry circles. Was like, are they just doing this to make sure that like people see, hey, we're recruiting well to keep his job for another year and he succeed?
Like I'm not exactly sure like the functionality of this team, but like it's definitely talented.
Yeah, it's not untalented, if nothing else.
Yeah. And then just looking at some other teams before we go into some more mid-major stuff. I kind of feel flipped as like a lot of people like UCLA more than USC. I feel like USC is clearly better right now. What's your stance on that?
I'd probably take UCLA. I think the lack of ball handling is a real issue at USC. I think they finished strong, which was huge, right? Like needed a guy like Des Claude to really piece it together, but I think this is a team of role players. It's, Chibuzo Agbo is a great player. I think my most half baked portal take of the spring was I think I said in a group chat at one point that I think Chibuzo Agbo should be recruited more than Kobe Brea. Still kind of stand by it. I think it's an interesting kind of angle into how people view what a great shooter is. But I think Buzo's awesome. But I think St. Thomas is not going to be a very good Big Ten player. I've seen too much. Terrence Williams is Terrence Williams. Their bigs are bad. Cohen and AG are below average bigs in the Big Ten. They have all these culture guys on their bench, and Slatchert and Pope and Matt Nowling, who probably none of them are good enough to really play. Kevin Patton's a really nice roll of the dice, but I don't really know how he's getting on the floor unless he's just the general backup. And I'd be worried about the spacing they're providing Claude. Last year, I think what really beat away at Claude's efficiency was he got a lot of grenades. He was throwing the ball and forced to take tougher shots than he really should have, because their team didn't have quite enough firepower. And I think you're going to run into that with just a lack of shot creators on this team, other than really Claude and St. Thomas, who I'm skeptical of how he moves up a level. I think with UCLA at least, I think they're going to be much better defensively. I think Kobe Johnson helps there. I think William Kyle helps there. I think Daly's an interesting gamble. I like Bilodeau a lot. The guard's getting older. And Mick's a really good coach. I think there was a lot of kind of ridiculous narrative around that last year. How the game has just passed him by magically after 3 straight Sweet 16.
I mean, the press conferences were entertaining.
Oh yeah, he was miserable. I mean, every year there's 3 to 5 guys who just truly hate their lives and can't wait until March 17th or wherever their season ends. And Mick was one of them. But I think they've rebuilt well. Good Lord. They've rebuilt well. And I think I don't necessarily think they need to be the consensus top 25 team that everyone seems to have them as, but I'm probably going to wind up with them in the 20 to 25 range. I don't think it's I don't think it's weird. I think they're about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm just maybe a little higher on a lot of the pieces at USC than you are. I think St. Thomas can be a good contributor. I think Bryce Pope can be a contributor. I love Abo as well. And I thought Cohen kind of proved a lot to me with how well he stepped up to UMass. I know it's another big step, but I think he's been through some wars. He played for a really tough team, and I think he brings an element to USC in the low post. He's just a really good low post scorer. And you talk about Mick being a great coach. Muss is also a great coach.
No, you're right. Yeah, that's fair.
I think there's just a lot more roll of the dice types at UCLA, and a lot fewer guys that I think came from winning cultures.
I will say, I think it's sort of funny. I think if you swapped all the UCLA transfers with all the USC transfers, I think you would probably believe it just as easily if all right, these are the guys they took. Especially the all right, Terrence Williams graduating Michigan, that fits UCLA's vibe. You got the Ivy kids who can shoot and give as a retort to last year's stuff. If you told me this is the roster they built, I wouldn't have been surprised. So it is kind of an interesting foil, and I think they'll both be good teams. I think USC is probably closer to a bubble team, but I like UCLA.
Yeah, and it should be really interesting to see how the cross country travel affects the Big Ten with UCLA, USC, Washington, and Oregon, who I really like. I think Jackson Shellstad can take a big step. Kwame Evans can take a big step. I saw a post a couple weeks ago. I was like, oh, who's your breakout sophomore in the Big Ten? And it had Owen Freeman on the list, and it was Deshaun Harris-Smith, Xavier Booker. And I'm like, my answer is Kwame Evans. And
how much do we consider a breakout talking about Owen Freeman here? How much do we consider a breakout candidate, the guy that won freshman of the year in the conference?
That's
I'm just saying, he might not have been on there, but I'm just thinking of the freshman from the Big Ten last year. But yeah, and I was this is Kwame Evans. I was really low on him this time last year, but he was a guy that proved a lot to me this year, even though his numbers didn't really stand out. He moved better on the court than I expected him to, and I think he's got a lot of the tools to make a real big impact in the Big Ten.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I'm sort of interested in Oregon. I think there's some natural skepticism after the last several years of kind of woeful regular seasons relative to talent, but theoretically they should be pretty good in the backcourt. Have spacers in the front court with Evans and Biddle and Brennan Angel as well. Like, there's some pieces here to be pretty interesting. And 2 spots left. They're in the Wooga Poplar sweepstakes.
Yeah. All right. Now I kind of want to get into the mid-major, a bunch of mid-major teams that we've kind of been impressed with how they've handled the portal. Jonathan, do you have one that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think I want to start in the A10 with Duquesne, because like new coach, but like they took a lot of intriguing transfers, and like if Joyce like knows what he's doing and like can get that team to play together, I think they potentially have like top 2, maybe could win the league type potential.
I like that team a lot as well. David Dixon is a guy that really came on strong last year. And then you bring in Corbett, who was a stud, Edwards, who was a stud, Williams, who was a stud, Dinkins, who was a stud, and Wilborn, who was also a stud, but obviously much lower level. And then you bring back Natchez and DeMichael and Rozier. And I just think that's a complete team.
Yeah, like they plugged the holes, which is a big deal. I like, I think Corbett's probably the swing piece. I think the thing that will be interesting for him, like you have to play in structure when you're in the A10. Like you have to be able to like make plays in the half court. Like it can't just be, hey, like I'm gonna isolate. Hey, I'm gonna go get an offensive rebound because I'm more athletic than my opponent. Hey, I'm gonna like he's gonna be able to do a lot. He did a lot of that stuff at Chicago State. It's super productive. But like for him to be a really good A10 player, he has to be able to play consistently in the half court in structured settings, not turn the ball over. It's a different world going from Chicago State to Duquesne. I think that'll be a challenge. I think the shooting with Edwards and Williams is nice, and
Dinkins can shoot.
Right, we'll see what happens with Drew as the head coach. Like, I'm interested to see how it develops. I think they have really quality depth, which I think is probably the biggest sell for me. And I think their portal guys are all like solid. Like they got rotation players, which is important, especially when you're, they had a lot to fill. So the fact that they got, I think 5 guys who are probably ready-made rotation players, maybe even 6 if you count Cam Crawford from Marshall. Yeah, I think you do as a rotation. Like they got 6 guys who can play in the A10. Like I think they probably built things very similar to how like Loyola did. Like Loyola's big thing has been their depth. And last year, played 10, 11 guys, and I think Duquesne's been a deep team under Dambrot. I think Drew Joyce and Drew Valentine have both really embraced the depth point and having not a ton of separation, 1 through 9, 1 through 10, 1 through 11 potentially. And I think that's something that both those teams can rely on. And we saw it with Loyola. Like one of the reasons they were so successful was like they had different guys who could step up on different nights last year. It was Sheldon Edwards out of nowhere scoring 27 on the road at Mason, and taking a huge step forward. Damon Delacoon being a huge bench piece, like things like that. I thought really, really swung their season. And I think if you're Duquesne, the biggest thing you can sell me on is the fact that they have a bunch of different guys who can help you on different nights.
2 programs that I thought have lost a lot, but have continued their momentum, I think, in the recruiting world and just their ascent up the college basketball ladder, with kind of cemented with new coaches this offseason. FAU and James Madison, I think both did impressive work in the portal. I mean, FAU is still kind of holding out because like Baba Miller is heavily rumored there. If they land him, that's 5 transfers that could all start. Obviously, Miller kind of more of a 4 or 5 than a true 5, but he's got enough size to play the 5 at that level. Caleb Glenn coming from the high major level, obviously not a good team, but he showed some flashes. I liked AJ Staten McRae at Samford. Kai Tandy played at a high major level and then was a star at a low major level. And Leland Walker was tremendous for a really good Eastern Kentucky team. And they were able to get Vanderpool to come back and Trey Carroll to come back. So they're not completely gone. Obviously, JMU brought back Xavier Brown, who I think is a fun backup guard for them with Mark Freeman. But they also brought Justin Taylor back home, who I think with more structure on the offensive side, plus just a new start, can be a really good piece. Elijah Hutchins Everett would start today for Seton Hall. I'm still surprised. Look, that's not like I thought he was good last year for Seton Hall. I was surprised he entered the portal. I thought like, oh, this is just your starting center next year, and like especially that like he's ending up at James Madison. Like, if you could pencil him into a Seton Hall type lineup, I'd say all right, that's fine. Like, not that obviously you'd have to have a good coach and development system for me to truly trust it, but I think he's a good player, and could definitely play at a high major level, and they're bringing him here. All right, that's crazy. Mark Freeman, obviously a player of the year for Spradlin. Luke Anderson was, I think, like the D2 player of the year or something. Eddie Ricks is another athletic piece in that front court. AJ Smith. I just think Spradlin, that's obviously a program with a ton of resources. It's probably the next school, the next mid-major school, I mean, after like Memphis and company, to make the jump to maybe the high major level, considering the amount of money that is sunk into athletics there over the past however many years, the facilities, considering the type of school it is, it's a gigantic public school in a rich state. Like that's a school on the upswing in every sport.
Yeah, the Spradlin hire was dynamite. And he certainly backed it up with the moves this spring. I think AJ Smith's going to be a great player for them. You mentioned Taylor. I think he'll help quite a bit. I think Freeman getting like an elite guard was a big deal as well. Even if he's not elite, like just a above average guy, like an all conference level guard. Great place to start. And then, I think Ricks is a guy that has a huge future. I think so much as a mid-major in the portal, I think you have to do a lot of like, how can we get guys, a year before they were going to blow up, and maybe a year after they didn't blow up type thing, right? Like, buying the stock at the right time. Obviously, they had a connection with him from being at Moorhead, but Eddie Ricks is a guy that if he's back at Moorhead last year is like a high major kid this time next year. So to get him into your program is a big deal. As for FAU, I guess my last take on Spradlin and JMU, like, if you asked me who is next year's Danny Sprinkle or Steve Lutz, who could be one and done and move straight to the high major level, it's Spradlin. Now, I don't think he's wired that way. I don't think he'll want to leave. And I quite frankly think a lot of the jobs that would have made the most sense for him opened this year. West Virginia would be one. Oklahoma State would be one. He had a relationship with DePaul, obviously with Dwayne Peavy. But if the right thing opened, like Preston, I think is like a stud. And I would not be surprised if he's like in that conversation. As for FAU, they talk a lot, Jacobs does, about having 2 point guards. They have maybe 3 with Tandy, Leland Walker, and Nico Moretti, all who can play on the ball and play making ball screens. Tandy's certainly the most score first of the 3, but I think you can make that work. McRae will help them as an athletic wing. Same with Glenn as a 3-4. Miller would be a massive get, because otherwise the size is a question. 2 overseas kids that it's just tough to rely on those guys from day one unless you're like a really, really, really high level player. Like, it's one thing if it's Kasparis Jakashunas. It's another if it's Montas Kosanis or Matas Vokititis. Like, I think the examples of guys coming over to the States who are just like normal Euro recruits and immediately being studs as freshmen are pretty few and far between. So getting Baba would be massive. We'll see if they can get that one across the finish line.
Yeah, and you mentioned Spradlin as a potential sprinkle. The other names that I would kind of throw my hat in on that would be, I just had the name. I just had the name. Oh my God. All right, the other name that I had in mind was David Riley. If he's able to bring Cedric Coward, who just left the draft today and is in the portal, and one other kid from Eastern Washington still in the portal. If he's able to bring both of them, they have 2 spots left. Washington State could be really good, and he could. I think that could be a long-term gig for him, considering he's spent so much time at EWU. But like, I also think like he's a good enough coach to get a high major. It's just that maybe some of them opened. Like if Tad Boyle retires next year, he gets a call at Colorado. I'm sure. If Washington State's good, obviously. And then the other name that I had in mind as Josh Schertz.
Schertz is the obvious one.
Yeah.
We'll see how that one goes in year 1. And I think he has a great job. That's the only other difference. Is like,
yeah, that's a terrific job.
It's not even just like, right. It's not even just Utah State, where Utah State has, won everywhere, but like, they've always won, but they haven't had the money. Like,
Utah State's the VCU of the West.
I was truly shocked how many people did not realize how good of a job SLU was when he left Indiana State for it.
Yeah, I also look at that and say, like, but Schertz is also a guy that is a mainstream name right now. He got Louisville attention. So essentially, if SLU's really good next year, like, that's a potential coach at, like, not just any high major. Like, if a big time high major opens,
he just got to actually make the
Villanova opens, like that. Like, obviously, it would be weird to see Villanova hire a guy that's not like a Philly area or in the family, but like that's the type of job that he could get next year if SLU's good.
Right. He just has to actually make the NCAA tournament, which he hasn't done yet.
Yeah. All right. I think that's all we got. Jonathan, you want to take us out? And Kevin, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. If you came to hear about Tyler Self and where he's working, you came to the right place. If you came to hear about numerous Jordan Ivy Curry mentions, because he seems to come up every single show these days, you came to the right place.
And Lawson Lovering.
And Lawson Lovering. And if you came to hear about Caleb Grill and what he's up to, you came to the right place. This is Season 5, Episode 5 of Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Stealers. We'll see you next time.